Good evening and welcome to the Hive Buddy Bee Club. It's absolutely wonderful to be here as always, and we hope that those that have joined us here live tonight have a wonderful night with us. But it's great to be here ultimately, and we're in the thick of it in the season now here in the southern half of Australia, especially down here in Victoria. So it's starting to get a little bit exciting. But tonight we're going to dig into some of the topical issues of the now and share our experience of what's happening with us and a few things that we've found. But first up, Carmel, welcome to the show. Wonderful to have you here.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. How have you been? Are you enjoying this weather?
Thank goodness for this weather. The break in the weather has been wonderful. The bees are responding to it really nicely. It's kind of a bit concerning, let me also add there, because as we know, this early warmth can catch you out. And I've already talked about that last month, getting caught out by the bees, but so be it. That's just what happens.
Yeah. It does make it easier to get out and do your hive check. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, let me just get the guys clued in on sort of what we did last month. It'd be great just to tell you a little bit about that.
Yes,
for those that
my memory.
yeah, for those that didn't get to join us, and of course you can catch it up on the Hive Buddy Community YouTube channel. We talked about Varroa here in Australia, but we talked about a few different points. We talked about natural predators to Varroa. We talked about how planting sunflowers can actually have an effect on lowering Varroa mite numbers. There's some science starting to show up about that. You dived well into talking about swarms and managing swarms, Carmel. That was an absolute goldmine of quality information. We talked a bit about things like how to recognise honeybee scouts, which linked in nicely with your swarming, because if you can recognise bee scouts, you can actually start to predict that they're on their way for potentially swarming. Yep. Do you remember we talked about how do bees move eggs around the hive?
Yes. You just talked to me bitterly that night.
Yeah. So,
I really thought that they did move eggs around, but you're telling me they don't.
Some of these odd things that are out there that, we may not know anything about, or, catches us by surprise when we see something happening like that. And you might remember my favourite moment. No, it wasn't. I can't say it was my favourite moment, but we talked about what being ripped hot and in your 50s has to do with beekeeping.
Even just hearing that makes me laugh.
It's slightly concerning, but
really good journalism. That
great journalism. And if you want to know more about what that was all about, you'll have to go back to the other show. I'm not going into that now because I'm remaining quite scarred from that experience. Anyway, there you go. But tonight's sponsor, just a really quick mention, is the show is brought to you by the Hive Buddy Bee Clubs Online. So perhaps you're tired of juggling the responsibilities of managing your beekeeping club and maintaining some sort of an online presence. Well, Carmel, look no further, because Hive Buddy is here to make your life look a little bit sweeter. So with the easy setup, dedicated support and feature-rich platform, Hive Buddy is the bee club hosting solution you've been waiting for. You can obviously get in touch with myself, but also hivebuddy.com.au if you want to learn more. But tonight, Carmel, is what we're here for, is to enlighten and enthrall some people that have decided to spend their evening with us. You're going to hit us up in a minute with some industry news. I'm going to share some research and learnings that I've uncovered, some real crackers tonight. It's a bit of a sad start to the evening. It's not going to be full of smiles, but we'll turn that around later, because you've got a lot to tell us about queen bees.
I do.
And at the end, and this is sort of a bit cryptic, I'm going to talk to you about the collective power of bees.
Ooh, collective power of bees.
Yeah, for now, I want us to address our collective power of our own energy to you, Carmel, and I'd love for you to give us a bit of an update. What's going on?
Yes, well, an update in the industry. Obviously, we do know that a big decision was made around Australia this week. And I'm going to actually share my screen, if that's okay with everybody, so I can share some. That's always at the top and in my way. I want to share some websites with you. Let's start here. So can everyone see that? I hope so. as of the 19th of September 2023, we have now gone from the eradication of Varroa in New South Wales to management. For some people, this is, you know, really disappointing. For other people, it's actually a really big relief. I want to
I could understand, Carmel, and you probably know these numbers better than me anyway, but up until recently, there was 32,000 hives euthanized, but there was another 50-odd thousand lining up to be euthanized.
That's correct, yes.
Does that seem about right to you? So that's a staggering number of beehives, and when you think about that, what's that, 80-something thousand with no end in sight? 80,000 is starting to become, you know, 7, 8, 9 or 10% of Australia's managed beehives. Big number.
Yeah, probably more than 10% actually. I think if we're sitting at around 500,000 beehives around Australia, that's actually more closer to 15%.
Staggering.
So what happened here on my screen, we ended up with some hives along the border here, because around this area is all almond pollination, where Victoria, New South Wales and South Australia all meet each other. And so to put it in perspective, and again, these numbers are not correct, but it gives you a general idea. We had about, let's say 200, we ended up with 277 infected premises. Now, let's say, to make this story simple, within the 270 infected premises, we had the 32,000 hives destroyed. But in the last 7 infected premises, we suddenly jumped to an extra 40 or 50,000 hives. So the number of hives jumped exponentially in a very short amount of time. And up here in the top of New South Wales on the coast there, that's all the blueberry area. So blueberries need pollination there. And then if you had red zones down here along the border of the Murray River, and the almonds had finished and hives start robbing each other, and they can't be moved on to their other pollination jobs, because whether we like it or not, Australia's food industry is linked to migrationary pollination. And so if we don't move those hives are going to start starving, and we need them for our food. And so it was just unfortunate that it happened that way. So the map has changed. We now have the yellow area is for management, and the green area is for suppression. So they're still going to try and stop the spread of it into other states. And of course, it's just early days yet. But this website is the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries. So this is a regular one that I visit. And like I said, you know, there's some really big emotions around all of this for some people at the moment, but this is where we're at. And I thought what I can do is share some links that could be helpful and useful so that you can keep up to date, but also share some solutions that you might find helpful as well. So I think one of the other main ones that if you can get on your mailing list or become a member of this is ARBIC. So ARBIC is the Australian Honeybee, I can never remember it.
Industry Council.
Industry Council, that's right. Now ARBIC is made up of, and I want to have a look at our members. So these members, they all had a vote. And for a very long time, they were divided as to whether we should go into eradication or management. And so these you've got the New South Wales APRIS Association, the Queensland Beekeepers. So every state of Australia is represented, the Victorian APRIS Association, South Australia, Western Australia, Tasmania. So these are our governing bodies and other bodies that, you know, we can talk to. We can, like, I'm on the mailing list of the Victorian APRIS Association because I live in Victoria. So any of these, whatever state you're in, I would suggest that you sign up to their mailing list and get newsletters and updates and all of that sort of thing. The Australian Queen Breeders Association, crop pollination. Obviously, they had a big vested interest in us going to management. Honey packers and the Amateur Beekeepers of New South Wales, Association in New South Wales. So these are all kind of, they're up at the state level, and they work together as a team to give a voice to the beekeeping industry in Australia. Once I've finished chatting, I've actually I'll post a link in a minute with all of those links for you. And if you're watching this on YouTube later on, or you're listening to it as a podcast, go into the description, and hopefully we've remembered to put all those links in there for you. Some other stuff I wanted to share. Here. So this is the Victorian Apiarist Association. So this is the one that I get their newsletter regularly, and they've been really good. I've been getting a newsletter every week or an update, and they really have been communicating well. Obviously, Agriculture Victoria is the one that's my governing body for me here in Victoria. And again, they're going to have rules for the rules from state to state. They should be fairly similar across the board, but there will be some differences. So make sure that you go to your state governing bodies here in Australia. But what I want to share with you is Tokal College. So Tokal is in New South Wales, and in fact, I believe their hives, they're an agricultural college, and I believe their hives were initially in the red zone when it all started. But they have bought out this Varroa mite online training for 2023. They've just released it. Well, that started in July. So this is some online training. It's free. It's not going to cost you anything. You can register and do the course. And I just thought I might show you. So these are the modules that are in it. How can the mites get into the hive? How do you spot it? Varroa mite symptoms, surveilled methods, alcohol wash methods, other surveilled methods, sugar shakes, report any suspected Varroa mites, Varroa updates and rules by state and territories. Oh, hold on, there's more above that because I started it. The life cycle of the Varroa mite. What is a Varroa mite? So I'm about halfway through, and that took me about 15 minutes to do. So it's going to take you about half an hour to an hour to go through those modules, and it can start our learning. Even if you don't have Varroa mite yet, it means that when it comes, hopefully it may never reach you if you're if you're not in New South Wales. I know with American foul brood, I knew the theory behind it before I've only ever had AFB once, and I was so grateful that I had that theory in my head, because when it happened, I knew what I needed to do. I already knew it was a reportable thing. So it meant I was able to respond rather than go into panic. So I think
you're not back at square one, are you? You're starting at a point where you've got some awareness, and maybe you lose a little bit of that as time goes on. But the best thing is you've got a resource ready to go back to and plug straight into when you need it.
Correct, absolutely. I just want to share a couple of other little resources other resources are, you've got this Be Aware website, beaware.org.au, and again they have a nice section on Varroa that you can read up about. But within Be Aware, if you search training, if you go into the search bar and go training, this one will come up, free biosecurity course for Aussie beekeepers. So not only does this talk about Varroa, but right down the bottom here, there's a link, beaware.org.au/training. Again, if you haven't done this one yet, and this is Australia-wide, and they actually tell you, because some of the rules vary for small hive beetle in one state. In some states, small hive beetle is reportable. In some states, small hive beetle is not reportable. So this little course here it goes chalk brood, small hive beetle, wax, like it has a whole variety of other pests and diseases. So that's another valuable course to do. So that's the Be Aware website. And then if you're into reading, here's a few books that you might find helpful. Tonight, Bob's Beekeeping happened to have them all in the one place, so that's why I'm using their links, but wherever you can source these from. So Bob did the Australian Beekeeping Manual, which is very popular in Australia. He's now brought out this one. So this is a recent release. So that's the Honeybee Pests and Diseases. And knowing how Bob wrote the first one, I think this one is going to be very easy to understand with great pictures to guide you through it. Another book that you can get now, I've heard this one's quite interesting. It is from New Zealand, but New Zealand got Varroa maybe 20 years ago. And what I've heard is this book kind of tells their journey and their history through that experience. So we're kind of at ground zero now, so we can probably learn some things from the spread and you know, different treatments that may or may not become available to us. And so that book is there as well. And then finally, this is an agriculture guide, an Australian ag guide, and this is also managing pests and diseases and other disorders of the hive. So there you go. There's some useful bits and bobs there.
And that's comprehensive, Carmel. Like, you've gone through a lot there very quickly in a huge number of resources that people can reach for. There's obviously others out there as well.
So let me
different opinions and thoughts as well of what should be done. So go and seek your own advice, but that's a really good starting position.
Correct. So look, let me just post all those links for you. Oh, there they are. Done. Bang. All right. They're all in the chat. If you want to copy and paste that anywhere or click on those links, they're going to sit there for the rest of tonight.
And how about I'll actually, for those that have registered, which is anyone that's on now, I'll send out an email with a follow-up, a few resources sometime tomorrow or the next day, so that everyone can have that in their inbox ready to go.
There you go. Done. So that's me done. I hope I didn't gabble on for too long, but I thought it was really important to, you know, it's, you know, some of us had really hoped we could get rid of it, but it's, you know, things have shifted. So let's arm ourselves with some information.
Yeah. No, good work, Carmel.
Thank you.
Well, I've been trawling the news feeds and what have you over the last few weeks, but like you've already said, it was just sitting there heavy with Varroa mite related information, and you could really hardly find a way through with any other information. But what it led me down was a path to maybe share more around impacts of Varroa, but not the direct impact itself. And what I'm referring to there, it's something that most people would have heard of if they've been into beekeeping for a little while, but maybe not know a whole lot about. And that is Deformed Wing Virus.
Yes.
Deformed Wing Virus. And you might say, well, what is Deformed Wing Virus? But, well, it's quite clear it's named after one of the key symptoms of what actually happens. And the reason I wanted to read a little bit about this is just what you've already said, Carmel, is let's arm ourselves with the knowledge and, you know, some background information about what may be coming over the hill at some stage soon. Now, the reason I've brought that up now is because it's known that deformed wing virus is carried and transmitted really well through Varroa mites. So Varroa mites are here now. But the good news at the moment, although it's hard to sort of quantify and stay up to date moment by moment, is that there has been no deformed wing virus found yet in Australian bees in the areas where Varroa mites have infested. So at this point in time, it is possible that we will not have deformed wing virus. But what if we did? Let's at least explore that a little bit. So as I said, it is about the deformities of the wing, and it impacts the well-being of the bee, and is actually found very prevalent in other countries where Varroa mites are found. In New Zealand, for example, they would say that every apiary has deformed wing virus in it. Now, is that every single hive at every moment? Maybe not, but it's certainly would be found in every single apiary. In other parts of the globe, they would say at least 50% of beehives have deformed wing virus. being able to be detected inside their hives. But despite it being so common, and that's pretty frightening to think that it is that common, bees can actually tolerate low levels of deformed wing virus. They actually can tolerate it all right without suffering really ill effects.
Well, I guess the lower you can keep your mite count, the better it's going to be then, right?
Well, funny you say that. So everything is around about managing Varroa mites here and keeping those numbers down so that exactly that transmission is kept low. There are lots of different ways transmission can occur, even reading that it can actually be from queen to egg, and it can be from one bee to another, passing it on to another through just contact or consuming food.
Yep.
But it is Varroa mite that is by far the most common vector for this disease and is the easiest way for it to go from place to place. So it's about like watching for this Varroa mite levels. So it sounds like it's easy to observe, and it really is. Like, we all know what a bee looks like here in Australia, but what if you saw one which had wings that were just not how they should be, completely damaged and deformed? And occasionally you do see that in our own hives here, and there's probably just a genetic little muddle up or something else has happened.
That's often a temperature thing.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so if there's a sudden change of temperature and it's usually on the outside of the frames, because the wings are the last things to develop.
Yes.
So if there's I think it's a sudden chill, and if they cluster and then the last row kind of misses out, don't quote me on it, but I've heard that it's a temperature thing and they can come out sometimes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, then it's really obvious that you would see this inside your hive and need to be looking for that if we were to find deformed wing virus has made it into Australia. And it is, as you said earlier, it comes back to being really conscious about the level of Varroa mites you have in your hive. And they talk about keeping levels under 3 mites per 100 bees. Now, in a well-infested beehive will have many more mites than that. A background level, once Varroa mites in an area, you can assume there'll be a background level of Varroa mites in your hive at all times, just like let's be controversial, a vaccinated population would still have some background disease in their population. The same thing happens here. Well, don't start it. Don't send me emails about, I can see what's going to happen now. But just important.
It was just an example. It was just an example.
Just an example. That's exactly it. Anyway, so it comes down to monitoring for Varroa. Anyway, that's it. I'm not going to go deeper into that tonight. It's just a starting point to be thinking about these other things that are there and why it's still important to be vigilant about Varroa to this day. Can I tell you about Carmel?
The main point is, though, that at this stage they haven't detected any viruses none at all.
That's
how many viruses could there be in other?
Oh, look, there are, and I think in that same article, there's about 28 known viruses to impact on honeybees.
Yeah, right.
And
we were lucky we haven't so far. They haven't found any.
I'll clarify. Point of order. Don't know if there is any that have been identified, but deformed wing virus has not been identified yet. Now, maybe it has been lab tested and it's here, but it just hasn't got out into the general public, into the resources I have access to. So time will tell.
Okay.
Hey, here's another one for you. It's not just Varroa that we're thinking about tonight. Have you heard of the red dwarf honeybee?
No. Is this good news?
On to the next topic.
Oh, really? So a good thing we're wearing black then tonight?
Yeah, I think it might be fitting. So the red dwarf honeybee reminds me of a television show from, Red Dwarf, was that the 80s, 70s? I can't really remember. But anyway.
Yes, I love that show, the Red Dwarf. This is not related though, is it?
Not related at all. But I'm going to tell you about this exotic pest called Apis floreae, discovered, unfortunately, over in Western Australia in the Karratha region. Now, it's not the first time this pest has turned up here, unfortunately, but it's been managed really well previously. And these are known to be really good vectors of different pests and diseases. Of course, they can transmit mites, although they don't move Varroa mites. They're not a host for Varroa mites, but there are other mites that they can be host for.
So this is an exotic pest. It's not a native. Maybe I'm thinking of.
Yeah,
it's the red reed bee. So this is called what? The red
dwarf honeybee.
Dwarf bee. Right.
And it's quite a small little bee in comparison to the European honeybee that we're all familiar with. And where it's arrived is in an area in Karratha where it's actually surrounded by water. It's also a large shipping area, so it would have no doubt come in on in a shipping container or on a ship itself and been able to establish. It's more commonly found in through Southeast Asia and the Malaysian Peninsula, but it's made its way down here. Otherwise, it's not known in Australia at all, apart from this new finding. They have a small number of insects per colony, say up to 3,000. They migrate, swarm, and abscond readily, and that, I believe, is partly to do with the fact that they have an exposed external horizontal comb. Rather than establishing inside something, they just build it onto any old surface, attach it to a surface and build honeycomb directly. So it's interesting that it's on the outside.
Are they likely then to not want to come down where it's colder?
I suspect that could be true. I was thinking the exact same thing, but I don't know for sure. I don't know enough about its biology to be completely familiar with it. But It's just an interesting one to be going through and thinking that it's challenging. These things are going to keep coming. So, like, this is beekeeping. Beekeeping is the management of livestock, of a biological entity that is complicated and involved. It's going to be okay. You've just got to be clever and diligent enough to be really just taking this information on board and be prepared to learn a lot very quickly.
So we've got Varroa in the east, we've got red dwarfs in the west, and now we've got fire ants. Are they in Brisbane?
There's going to be a merger in the red centre.
They can meet in the middle at the red centre. You are very clever.
Very witty tonight. For once. Hey, let's move on from all the doom and gloom, and let's have a bit of a chit chat about what's happening in your apiary, Carmel.
In my apiary, well, where I am, obviously we've been having quite unusual weather.
Yeah.
Unseasonably hot weather, and we all knew that we were coming out of the 3 years of cold and wet, and I can't remember whether it's El Nino or La Nina, but it's one or the other. And now we're going into the other one, the dry season, and there's so much in flower around where I am. We've got bottle brush of just bang, they're like they've popped everywhere. We've got a lot of ornamental pears where I am as street trees, grevilleas, banksies, daisies, and of course pig face is everywhere. And our favourite ones, the cape weed, have just popped. So swarming's about to start. So that's kind of what's happening around my area. But I have some kind of embarrassing news.
What do you mean?
Well, let me share with you a couple of other bits of news first. And all of these little bits are to do about the queen. So 3 hives of 3 queens. 3 queens in 3 hives that I have, and they're in different locations. But one of them, she had requeened very late last year in the season. And as a result, I don't think found enough drones to mate with. And I actually we had some unusually warm weather in July, and I actually went and checked that hive in July because I was worried about it. And I noticed that they were making a couple of swarm cells already. And I've gone, are these swarm cells or are these going to be supersedure cells? I'm not sure. And I went, you know what, I'm going to get rid of them. But if they really want to replace her, they'll let me know. So the last check beforehand, she had very obviously turned into a drone layer. And so every 2 out of 3 eggs, 1 was a worker and 2 of them were drones. But not only was she laying those drone eggs in the drone cells, she was laying drone eggs in the regular worker cells as well. And so you get this funny motley pattern of very skinny drones coming out. And the reason I knew it was a drone laying queen and not a laying worker is because 1, I saw the queen. And 2, there was only 1 egg down at the bottom of, so laying workers tend to lay multiple eggs on the side of the cell, whereas this was just one egg down in the middle of the cell. So I knew it was a drone laying queen. So I actually helped the hive and we expired her. And because it's in an apiary with 5 other hives, I was able to borrow brood across, and they're now busy making themselves a new queen. So that's the first story. That's why it's kind of handy sometimes to have 2 or more hives next to each other.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Another one, I don't know how it happened, but it was a 1 frame box, and the hive was coming along nicely. First visit, next visit I turn up and there's no eggs, no brood, and there's 2 emergency cells there. And I went, okay, I must have squashed her somehow. Yeah. So that was a big reminder for me that when I have my frame, if the queen's up near the top, near the wood, or down near the wooden side piece, I have to remember to just usher her so she's in the middle of the frame, so that when I put the frames back into the hive, I don't squash her. So I haven't done that in a long time, so that was a little bit embarrassing. But my favorite story, and a friend of mine had done this years ago, and it was when I first started beekeeping, and I scratched my head and I'm like, how could you ever do that? But I managed to do it. Well, in wintertime, I always run a double brood, but one of those broods becomes honey for the bees, which I leave them in winter. So I take the queen excluder out. So one of my first jobs at the start of spring is to put the queen excluder back in.
Well, you don't want her laying eggs in the honey chamber.
Well, yes, I now have a hive that's laying eggs in the honey chamber.
Oh.
Thank goodness it wasn't a flow hive, otherwise I would have ended up with drones everywhere. So I've gone to check this hive, and my normal practice is, so all the heavy lifting's already done. I do the heavy lifting at the start. And this was a 4 boxes high, this hive. Oh, nice. So top box gone, next box gone, queen excluder, next box. I'm down to the bottom box. And I'm like, where's the brood? There's no brood. There's no larvae. There's a little bit of cat brood, but there's no eggs. There's no larvae. I'm like, oh no.
I see where this is going.
Have they swarmed already? Surely they haven't swarmed. It was less than 2 weeks ago I was here. So then I've gone to the second box, same story. No eggs. I'm like, is this queen getting old? What's happened? Do they want to replace her? I'm pretty sure she's only 2 years old. And so I'm like, surely she's not above the queen excluder. And an interesting thing, this hive that had never before, because I run poly hives and there's really not much, I don't have a hive mat because there's really
quite tight, aren't they, at the top?
Yeah. So they don't tend to build in under the lid. There was comb everywhere in under the lid. So I should have twigged then that there was something not right. So I got to the second box from the top, so that should have been a honey super, and there were eggs in there, and there was the queen in there. So I managed to put the queen above the queen excluder. Oh, but what I forgot to mention was the girls downstairs had made 1 queen cell. And what I found interesting was that this queen cell was in the swarm position, not in an emergency cell position. So that's where I'm going, did they maybe move an egg? I don't know. Because I think
imagine that.
Yeah. So I actually decided to leave that queen cell there. And so I've now got a queen above the queen excluder and a queen cell below the queen excluder. And I'm going to go back tomorrow and I'm going to turn that into a split.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to take away the old queen because that will feel more natural for them, as far as, the old queen's gone, some bees have gone, we've got a new queen, and we can take off again. So
so the hive's going to think it's had its swarming event. You've artificially swarmed it by splitting it.
Yeah, but yes, I went, oh my goodness, I've put the queen above the queen excluder.
Not first. Never the first in beekeeping.
It was always a first, yeah. Yeah, but that's okay. I get a split out of it.
Fascinating.
How about you? How are your bees going?
Oh, I've got an embarrassing story too. Well, it's a little bit
Not another
embarrassing.
swarm,
No,
surely.
no, not another
Oh,
swarm. Those that I was, I think I had the earliest swarm in the southern hemisphere this year, and that's not me trying to brag about that. I'm genuinely embarrassed. It was over a month ago, and it was from my own hives in my own backyard. But that's not the story I'm here to tell you about tonight. Quite a few people on this call with us now have been following my journey trying to learn and understand a bit about Slovenian beehives.
yes.
The AZ Slovenian beehive got on my radar maybe 5 or 6 months ago now. I'm not sure exactly when it was. And they do things a little bit differently. And I was instantly attracted to how it was done. And it's a beehive where you build it solid. So all the different levels are in one box. And you might go, well, how do you get in there? How do you lift the lid or lift the boxes off? You don't do any of that. None of that happens. And what tends to be the way it works is you've got your different levels, but you slide out each frame and you slide them back in after you've inspected. And you do that from behind the hive. So can you imagine a really big door on the back that you lift? Mine's just a panel. I lift the panel off and I can see 3 levels. Now, at the moment, that colony is only in the bottom level. So I've got a board that sits in there and says, no, you're not going up the top. So you give them more space as you need to that way. So it's not that they don't have, they've actually got 33 frames worth, 27 frames worth of space. Each level has 9 frames.
Yeah, right.
Capacity for 9 frames. Tomorrow, I intend to go to that next level.
Yep.
If not tomorrow, within a few days. And it's an amazing way to keep bees. In fact, we did a whole meetup another month or so ago. I just posted that in the chat comments here. We did a whole meetup online to talk about Slovenian beekeeping. Now, none of us were experts in the room. It was about talking about it, learning, discussing the pros and cons. You might like to watch that video. But it's really quite different to this methodology of lifting boxes on and off. And apart from initially building this thing and lifting the whole thing up on the pedestal that I've got it sitting on, or this table I've got it sitting on in the backyard, the heaviest thing I lift, Carmel, is about 3 kilos, which is 1 frame of honey. Nothing else is more heavy than that. So if you think about the physical effort you have to go to manage a beehive, there's not much with this.
Yeah.
Anyhow, that's just to make sure people understand what's going on. What happened a few weeks ago when I first put it in position and sat it there, and in fact, it's so significant in my backyard that I've got a neighbour with a 6-foot high fence who can see it from a distance, and he calls it the Eureka Tower, which is one of the biggest towers here in Melbourne. It's that significant, substantial on his horizon. Anyway, those in Melbourne here would remember a few weeks ago an incredible stormy Friday night.
Yeah.
Friday night that both the Eureka Tower in Melbourne and the Eureka Tower here in my backyard on the Mornington Peninsula both had wind loads that were very substantial. The wind was phenomenal.
Oh no, what happened?
Only one Eureka Tower that night that got through it.
No.
Because mine blew off its pedestal and landed on the ground on its side.
What? Oh, so the pedestal didn't blow over?
See, herein lies the issue, Carmel. I'm not always that clever. There's this table. The base of this hive system sits on the table.
Yeah.
And it's quite slippery. I literally needed to have strapped it down and the problem would have been solved. I didn't do that because the very next opportunity I was going to put some bolts through the floor into the table, so it was never going to move ever again.
Right.
Get to it. Never expected the wind to be so ridiculous. And at 2 a.m. in the morning, I'm lying there going, what is on earth happening in my backyard? And I woke up at 6:30, went down and had a look, and sure enough, the Eureka Tower was no longer standing.
Oh, no.
Anyway, it took me about 2 weeks to, not quite 2 weeks, maybe another 10 days before I could get in there. I could stand it up the next morning.
Yeah.
Or I could get in there, reorganise and put it back up. There's a queen, she's still laying. The bees had made a bit of a mess with some honeycomb in there because frames were out of position, even though I've got trying to keep everything packed, but that's what happened. It's absolutely heartbreaking, those moments.
Yeah, but how resilient are bees, really?
They're much more resilient than us. I'm still damaged. I'm sure they're fine now.
You've got trauma.
There's trauma. Anyway, that's my little share.
You strapped it down since, though.
It's fine now. Yeah, all game
Okay.
on. We are good. We are good to deal with the next hurricane.
Excellent. Good to hear.
Hey, that's a heap from me. I won't go through anything else in my beehives, but what about you? You've got some info to share.
I have. I want to talk, well, while we're on the subject of queens, why don't we talk queens?
Hit us up.
Yeah. So here we go. Let's talk queens. Hopefully you can all see that. And I'm going to whiz through this. So this is it's a deep dive, but long live the queen. So because this time of year it really is all about queens. Making queens. So the lifespan of a queen tends to be around 5 years, but her most productive years are the first 3. And so we have a choice as to whether we let her live out those years or whether we want to move her on after 2 or 3 years. But swarming is going to happen. Well, sometimes it's just their genetics. Some bees love to swarm more than others. I've noticed that Italians swarm a lot less than Carnolians, for example. And Carnolians will swarm like earlier in the season, and Italians will swarm later in the season. So some genetics, they just, that, and then the age of the older the bee gets, the more likely they're going to swarm as well. Yep. So a first year queen, unless they get really crowded and just don't have enough room, they tend to not worry about swarming. They might make a few practice cups, but so the types of queen cells, let's move onto that. So the practice cups, or the cups before they even put an egg in it, kind of looks like a little gum nut. And of course, all queen cells point down to the ground. A swarm cell will be down the edges of the frames or along the bottom. And in the case of a swarm cell and a supersedure cell, they build the cell first and then they put the egg in it. Whereas an emergency cell, the cell was already built as a worker cell, so the egg was there, but then they turn it into a queen cell, so they remodel it, which is why an emergency cell tends to be in the middle of the frame somewhere. And it's a different shape and sometimes slightly smaller than a swarm cell or a supersedure cell.
You've just explained that very simply, Carmel. So well done, because it takes most people a long time to understand that there's even different queen cells to begin with.
Yeah.
And that the different queen cells are there for different reasons. Yeah. And those different reasons are to do with the bee biology and what's happening in the hive and what the hive is intending to do next. So I can see you've got a huge list of information here ahead of us. But if anyone feels like they're swimming in information at the end of this, well, this is a pretty significant learning journey to go through, and it's one that'll really make a difference for how effective you'll become as a beekeeper if you understand this and can use this to your advantage.
Well, I had a emergency cell situation when I was in my first year of beekeeping, and I was like, my hive's not going to swarm. My hive's not going to swarm. Get rid of the queen cells. And I didn't. This was where I learned to always look for eggs first. Because I very diligently got rid of the queen cell, not knowing that it was an emergency cell. And my hive actually really needed that queen cell. Swarm cells, you tend to have lots of them, like 5 or 6 or 8 of them, and on many frames. Supersedure cells, there's usually only 2 or 3, and they're usually on the one frame, and they're towards the outside, like on a pollen frame, because the bees are hiding it from the queen because they're going to get rid of the queen. Whereas swarm cells are usually in the middle. They tend to be in the middle frames near the front door, and they're where the drones are. Yeah. So even the position can make a difference. All right. How to spot a failing queen? Like I said, I have to move through these. So the brood will shrink, so you won't be getting full frames of brood anymore. It'll be a much smaller cluster of brood, so that means she's getting older. the brood pattern, it could be a bit patchy and splotty, and she's not laying in that nice solid pattern. As I mentioned before, she could be turning into a drone layer, so she's running out of sperm and she can't actually fertilize the workers to create female bees anymore. I find that older bees, chalk brood tends to take over, because the chalk brood is killing a lot of those larvae, and the pace of that, with a younger queen, the pace of her laying will outpace the chalk brood taking over the
Yep.
So, but with an older queen, because she's laying at a slower rate, the hive can't expand and flourish and dry out, because you don't have that expansion, because the chalk brood and the laying, they're competing with each other too much. So again, getting a younger queen will help resolve that often. And the hive's just getting really aggressive. And I had a huge experience back in 2017. This hive, you could hardly go near it. Like, we literally taped up our wrists and our ankles and our zip areas with gaff, like they were at your face like a storm, like. And so we looked for the queen. It took us maybe 20 minutes to find her. We'd looked through both boxes very diligently. I expired her, and before we even put the new queen in, the whole hive went, oh. And the whole mood of the hive changed. It was phenomenal. Normally, when you requeen, sometimes you have to wait for the old genetics to die out and the new genetics to come through before you see that shift take place in the personality. But this one was instant. It was like, as soon as her pheromones were gone, the whole hive calmed down. It blew my mind away.
That's fascinating. So that was really that immediate impact.
Immediate impact.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, different breeds. So the main three breeds that we have here in Australia is the Carmelians. They are sort of black and white striped bees. They overwinter very well on not so much food, so quite often they're happy in one box over winter, but they build up very quickly at the beginning of spring, and they're the ones that will swarm more quickly. The Caucasians are the ones, they love to collect propolis. They love it. So if you don't mind working a sticky hive and you like to collect that propolis for yourself, the Caucasians, they have sort of a browny, coppery waist with and then it fades down to black. And then the golden Italians, of course, have been very popular here in Australia for a while. They lay a lot, but they gather a lot of honey, but they also eat a lot. So you have to leave them like a whole box over winter of honey, but they're really good. They've been bred for a lot of commercial honey production. But the thing is, with those queens, I find they're a sprinter, not a marathon runner. So the queen will go gangbusters and you'll get a big hive. They're a bit slower to start in spring, but once they get going,
they're off and away.
And you'll get full frames, like top wood to wood of brood. But after 2 years, that brood production will drop off very quickly. So that's why I say they're a sprinter, not a marathon runner. So the age of the queen comes through quite quickly with the Italians. But they're very calm. A lot of them are very calm on the only other breed that we've got here in Australia it's an offshoot of the Italian, is the Ligurian bee, and we've got a sanctuary on Kangaroo Island where they only have the Ligurian bee. Just as an interesting side note.
And a side note on that too is the Carnolians happen to be the only bee species allowed to be kept by beekeepers in Slovenia. I can't help but coming back to those guys, and they like that because of the climate for their region. That is their native honeybee.
Well, they do, and they're not big eaters. So, as I said, they overwinter. They're very robust over winter, so that they stay quite healthy over winter. So maybe that's why they're. The
other big bonus for their style of beekeeping with these frames that slide in and out is Carnolians don't produce a lot of propolis.
No.
So that is an easier way to manage that particular style of beehive.
Correct. There you go. Right, raising your own queens. So you can, like as I said before, I'm going to take advantage of that swarm / supersedure cell that I have, and that's going to be take over the hive, and I'm going to take the old queen away. So there's different ways of doing it. You can take the old queen away, you can take the new queen away, you can force them to make an emergency queen, or you can take advantage of the queen cells that are there. Just make sure that if you do leave any queen cells, I would leave no more than 2 or 3. Obviously, you want a bit of a backup plan in case one fails. But if you leave too many, you can sometimes get a secondary swarm from it. So one queen will hatch, she'll take off because there's just so many queen cells, and especially if they're of different ages. So make sure they're of the same ages, and I usually only leave 2 or 3. The rest I'll get rid of. But with a queen will need about 20 drones to mate with. So if you're going to be raising your own queen, now there's plenty of drones around, but earlier on in the season, you had to wait for the drones to come through before you start doing splits. With open mating, which means you let them go out and mate with the drones themselves, whatever's in your area, they're going to mate with. So you know, sometimes you don't always know what you're going to get. Sometimes it's a really successful mating, and you might have a Carnolian queen, but the babies will be mixed, and suddenly you're getting some propolis coming through, and you don't like propolis because they've mated with some Caucasian drones that are out in your environment. So, you know, I love propolis, I don't care, but it just means you're going to end up with a mixed bee if you let them open mate, which is not necessarily a bad thing. The length of the process. Now, I just want to, where are we going here? I want to show you this little chart. If you are going to mate your own queens, so from egg, this is day 1 when the egg was laid, it's going to take almost a month before she starts laying. So some people get to about 2.5 weeks in and they go, the queen's not laying there. The queen, hasn't it worked? Has it? And it's like, don't panic, because it's going to take 16 days before she hatches. Then she has a little bit of a rest. Then she has to go on her mating flights. And then she has another little rest while all of her eggs and everything get ready. And then she starts to lay eggs. So it really can take almost a month.
From what I understand too, there's a huge range of biological developmental steps that if you get into the deep science of this, that if there's a lot of steps that need to occur to be able to have a healthy, fertile queen, just to be grateful to get to that point. So during this phase, you want minimal interruption. You want a hive that's
Correct.
allowed to prepare that queen to be as healthy as possible.
Yep, correct. So when I'm doing a requeening, I will have a look. Around sort of somewhere between day 7 to day 11. Just to make sure that the cell's formed properly. Once it's capped off, then I'll leave it another 2 weeks because I want her to hatch, find a way around the hive, go on her mating flight, and I through that area, yeah, I won't disturb the hive.
Yep.
So yes, it's all right. I'll just go back to my Word document here. Okay, so how to spot a virgin queen. So you've got now virgin queens, once they've hatched, they run, and before they've mated, they're very fast in the hive. They're really hard to spot. But if you see them, what I find is down near their waist area, their abdomen's almost like a triangle. So it's very sharp and angular. And of course, it's not that much bigger than a worker bee. The difference, once she's mated, The widest part is not down by her waist, but it's more around the center of her abdomen. It gets engorged and elongated, and it's got this more rounded shape to it. So that's how you can tell then that she's mated. So I just thought that might be a useful little tip to have. All right, buying queens. So we have a queen colouring code, and our colour for this year, for 2023, is red. So if you're buying a marked queen and she's not marked red, then she might not be from this season. Where to source bees from? Well, especially considering we now have Varroa in New South Wales, I would be sourcing your queens from whatever state you live in, if possible. Yeah. And also climate-wise, they're going to be better climatized to your local state anyway. You can buy mated queens, virgin queens, and queen cells. Believe it or not, you can buy them in all those different stages. A queen cell is going to be the cheapest, around $15. A virgin queen, so she hasn't mated yet, so that would be one that you put in your hive and let mate out and about. She'll be about $25 to $30, and a mated queen will be 40, 45, 55, depending on who you buy it from, whether it's a pure genetics or not. So if it's open mated, you don't have as much control over the genetics as artificial insemination. You'll be able to have, you know, those more pure breeds. So there you go. Finally, how do we requeen? So we've decided our hive's failed, or we have a really grumpy hive. So the first thing is to have a queenless hive. Then you can either put in a frame of brood with eggs or 3-day-old larvae and make their own queen, or you can put in a frame that's already got some swarm cells on it and make use of that. Make sure they're around the same age. Or you could buy a queen cell, a capped queen cell, and you would very gently put that in between two cells and put it in the pointing down position, so that you can very gently just secure it in there, and the bees will come and put wax around it and look after it, and then they'll help to develop her. For a mated queen, it's best if you're going to take the old queen out and expire her. If you have the time and space to leave it for 24 hours, the hive by then, they'll be ready to start making an emergency cell, but they'll be going, we don't have a queen, we don't have a queen, we need a new queen. So then when you do introduce the queen cage, they're more likely to go, oh, thank God, here's a new queen. If you expire the old queen and put the new queen in straight away, sometimes they don't always accept her because they can still smell the old queen.
Yeah, too quick for them.
Too quick for them. Yeah. So look, you know, 4 hours or so, but if you can leave it a day, I think you're going to have a much better chance of them accepting. When you put the queen cage in, let's say the opening is up one end, don't have it pointing down to the ground, because if the queen cell falls by mistake and lands on the opening, the queen's not going to be able to get out. So you want to have the queen cage horizontal or slightly elevated upwards, and just again trap it between two frames, and then the bees will, you know, they chew through the fondant, and by then they're all friends and you have a new queen. You can also do queen banking. So if you've got 4 or 5 queens that you've bought, you've got a few hives to requeen, and you can't queen them straight away. If you've got a queenless hive, this is where you do put them in with the opening down on the ground, so the queens can't get out. And you can have more than one queen, because the hive's queenless anyway, and all of those queens will be looked after. And you can leave them there for, well, I've heard several weeks, but I've done it myself, and they were happy in there for a week. Before I had a client couldn't come straight away, and so I banked a few queens, and they were fine. Yep. So there you go. A little bit about queens.
That's not just a little bit, Carmel. That's an absolute truckload about queens. So thank you for sharing all of that. And I could
Well,
imagine for, like I said earlier, for those people that are new to this, maybe don't have a hive yet or in their first season right now, that's a lot to take in.
it is.
And all that is essentially a list of things you need to go away and learn now. And some people are just going to have their minds melted by that. Take your time, just pick off what seems logical and simple for you to start with. But it is a great that list is literally a great resource to start your learning journey on understanding the biology of honeybees. So thrilling. Thank you very much for sharing that one.
You're welcome. I will make sure I post that into our Hive Buddy forum as well for people.
Yeah, we'll get that out there, I reckon, without a doubt. A lovely question there, Carmel, has come in from Sandra, and this is, I want you to answer this. How do you expire a queen?
Yes, so I take her in my hand and I actually say to her, thank you very much. And then I squash her head usually, and I squash her body. And then I'll take her like a couple of meters away from the hive, and I'll actually bury her in the ground, because that also helps to get rid of the smells of her. So the bees. So yes, it's a bit of a sad process.
I must admit, sometimes I'm a little bit less elegant than that. The moment I see her and I know I've got the job to get done and it needs to happen quickly, grab, pinch, squash, throw.
Yep. So yes.
Grab, pinch, squash, throw.
Just think, like, we pull weeds out and we prune the garden sometimes for the health of the hive and the organism of the superorganism of the hive itself. Sometimes replacing the queen is the nicest thing you can do. Especially with, if you've got a very grumpy hive and you've got neighbours, it helps us to be compliant with our code of practice as well. Yeah.
Totally. Awesome. Thank you. Hey, Carmel, do you remember last year we made Hive Buddy calendars for Christmas?
We did.
And they had lots of beautiful pictures along with calendary sort of things in it.
Yes.
I'm going to do it again. I'm going to make another beautiful one.
Awesome.
And look at that. There, topical.
Queen cell.
Yep. I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to make it available nice and early soon. So I'm just telling everyone that come early October, I'm going to make sure they're up and running and available for you to be able to access and buy from Hive Buddy. It's a great way to support what we do. Helps us just pay a few of the little bills that sit there behind the scenes. Yeah. And it's an awesome Christmas gift. So I'm going to make sure I get them up and running way before Christmas, so you've got them nice and early and you can enjoy it. Look at that. How are we looking there?
That's
anyway,
awesome.
Shameless little plug there.
Yeah, we've got some great comments. A few people bought them as presents, and they love their calendar from last year. So there you go.
Yeah, ripper. Yeah. I've got two more things to tell you about, Carmel, and then I think we're just about ready to wrap the show up.
Sure.
The first one is we talked earlier about some beautiful weather coming up soon. Yep. I'm a massive weather nerd. Absolutely love it. And I'm already seeing some interesting indications of not only the warm week that we've got coming up down here in Southeast Australia, but a potential, not a guaranteed, but a potential very wet period after that. And I'm talking between now and sort of a week into October, so the next fortnight, really.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So I know that we're going to love the idea of getting into our beehives over the next, let's say, week, because the weather's going to be beautiful and the bees are going to be booming, and you probably should get into your beehives then. Have in the back of your mind that maybe there's a big wet coming and maybe bees won't be able to forage. As the week progresses, keep an eye on the longer range week out forecast. And if it's going to be that wet and windy and awful, bees not foraging, big population explosion, not much honey in a hive, as some people were saying at the start of the night, you could put your bees in a tricky situation. So that's just a comment. I don't know what's going to happen. No one knows exactly what's going to happen with the weather, but some early forecasting of some big rain early October in Southeast Australia, particularly Melbourne and the Great Dividing Range and in Tassie.
Simon, do you have a favourite website for a long-range forecast that you go to?
I'm such a nerd, and I've got so many, but I keep an eye on a few particular Facebook groups. One that I like is Your Weather Channel, JW, and then hyphen JWC. And I'd been tracking a few things there a little while ago, and it was literally while we were doing this, I got a pop-up from there. I'm that nerdy. It's about one of the few things I allow to pop up and tell me. And John from Your Weather Channel has put in exactly a comment about this weather coming up. So I'll share that link to that site afterwards. I can't do it just this very second. There's a few others I might mention as well. Like all of the regular Bureau of Meteorology, Weather Zone are fairly conservative. Weather Zone's not as conservative as the Bureau, but some of these other ones can forecast for you something that as a beekeeper you want to know of. Like I'd prefer to know that there's a chance of a huge, cold, wet moment in 10 days from now, and it not happen, rather than not notice it at all, or have a huge event occur. But the Weather Bureau was forecasting, 18 degrees with a chance of rain, yet it was 3 inches of rain later. So I'd always prefer to hear an extreme scenario when it comes to weather as a beekeeper and consider it at least. So that's one. But I've got something which does also link back to the weather. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Scientific American podcast, Carmel, but the Scientific American podcast did an episode a little while. It was only a little 60-second science little snippet called Bees Buzz in More Ways Than You Might Think.
Okay.
And it is this that I wanted to share with you from November the 15th last year. They did this little snippet, but I've just sort of reworked it. So it's a bit of an interesting story about bees and insects as a whole. So it's not just specific about bees. And it's not just that bees are there with their noise that we obviously can hear and we can tag in onto, but they're buzzing also with electricity as well. And there is, like when you get a swarm of them in the air, and this is the time of the year for obviously swarms, their combined electrical static effect of them flying in the air could actually give thunderstorm clouds a run for their money. And that might just seem fanciful and ridiculous.
So their buzzing actually creates static electricity.
Well, I'm going to tell you how beneficial that is and how important that is for the bee in the first place. But if you can imagine, if you just got a lazy 50 million bees, just 50 million bees, you could actually jump start a car with the amount of energy that they've got there. But I'm not necessarily suggesting that that's what you do.
Oh, wouldn't that be amazing? Like, I'm visiting it now.
So the whole reason that this is an important point or something to consider is when a bee visits a flower, they've got an electrostatic charge about them, and it's that charge that gets pollen to stick to them. And pollen doesn't just, they don't just go there and have to collect it. The pollen actually more or less jumps onto them because there's an opposite polarity charge, and that pollen leaps onto the bee, and then they collect it together and put it on their little pollen sac. If you don't know what a pollen sac is, go and Google that one.
Yeah. I've also heard that doesn't that interaction also, once it's changed the charge of the flower, then the next bee that comes along knows that flower's been visited?
There absolutely is something about that. And I don't know enough to speak with confidence to tell you the truth, but it makes sense. Bees are incredibly intuitive. They've obviously adapted with flowers for a very long time. To have some sort of relationship like that would not surprise me in the slightest.
Yeah.
So I want you to think about it. Like if you needed like billions of bees just to light up one simple LED light, that probably doesn't, give you an impression that it's going to do a whole lot. But the truth is we're dealing with more than just bees in our atmosphere. There are huge groups of insects in the air at any one time. And there's obviously other things in the air from birds and what have you, and bats and butterflies and, other things getting around in the atmosphere too. And the thought is that this is there's a huge amount of charge happening in the atmosphere that affects weather and cloud formation and dust dispersal anyway. The idea about this podcast was saying, can bees and other insects have an impact? Like the butterfly effect, can they have an impact on something on the broader atmospheric scale just by being there and moving around and doing what they do? It's an interesting thought. it goes on. So they were doing some the researchers behind this conversation were doing some simulations to see how other insects, think desert locusts. So desert locusts swarm in numbers of
trillions.
Nothing like we could possibly imagine. And they affect that atmospheric electricity. That is a known thing. These locust swarms can be massive and have huge amount of charge. And this is where they have the claim that insects could have more potential energy than an electrical storm.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
It goes on to note that it's quite interesting that atmospheric climate modelling doesn't have any way of accommodating these atmospheric interactions with insects.
Right. Okay.
And maybe we're just not. I get a sense that we're not as developed as well as we could be in that space to know how that works. But it's thought that it could influence rain, snow, droplet formation, and just how clouds form in general.
Yeah.
I never considered that could be on that scale, but it actually makes more and more sense the longer I think about it.
That's really interesting. And not to do with weather, but the whole electrical charge thing, because we know that our nervous system in our own bodies is electrical charging, right? And I know that they now use ultrasound to help with like healing of bruises and cellular regeneration and stuff like that. And so this kind of makes sense to me then, because I know in Europe where they use apitherapy as a traditional medicine,
yes,
there are these things called bee beds, and they've been saying that if you actually lay on a bee bed, on a hive, it can help you with back pain and that sort of thing, which would be targeting your nervous system, which is an electrical. So I'm wondering if that's how it works, and that's why it works. It's because of this electrical charge coming from the bees and realigning.
Many years ago, I would have thought this sort of thing was fanciful and a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I'm fast learning that we should not underestimate what we can't yet explain. And the more of that time that I spend learning and thinking about bees, the more I'm constantly surprised at what interactions occur in our environmental space and in our atmosphere that we just couldn't have possibly believed 30, 40, 50, 100 years ago. So I find it fascinating. And I'll just say one more thing relating to this story.
Yeah.
That in like Saharan desert conditions, they've always thought that sand or large particles move through the dispersal by wind. Like that's always made sense, and you can see fine particles and dust storms moving across a landscape and going, well, that's what's moving the sand. But it's not always been clear to the researchers how larger particles move.
Right.
And we're talking rocks, we're not talking stones, we're talking like large sand particles.
Yeah.
Thought is that perhaps this connection between dust or particles and insects might be like they might be hitching a ride on these locust plagues that are moving across a landscape, and these large particles are moving by the static electricity attaching them to the bodies of the locusts. If that happens to be true, that completely changes the script on how we look at movement of large particle sands and perhaps many other biological, geological processes that we currently thought we fully understood. That is my awesome share. I thought that was a cool one. And it makes me more perplexed than it does create clarity. But it's the kind
I've got more questions than answers.
So there you have it. It's
fascinating. Thank you for sharing.
So we're going to wrap up the show in just a moment. But before we do that, hang on for just one moment longer. The next show is already lined up for Tuesday, the 24th of October. So we'll be meeting back here online again that night. This time we met a little bit earlier for those that were available, so we could have a bit of a chit chat. And I invite those still listening to hang back for a bit of a chit chat if you like. We enjoy that, to wind down a little bit with you all. We truly do hope you found it valuable and worthwhile. We're always open for feedback and your thoughts. But before we completely wrap it up, Carmel, was there anything you wanted just to finish with?
No, I think I'm done. But long live the Queen. And may we have a smooth month over the next month and not too many swarms. And and beautiful health in all of our hives.
Absolutely, indeed. Thanks very much for everyone to be here, and Carmel, to you as well.
And thank you to our audience.
Indeed. Take care.
Bye.